1. The enemy that never sleeps. A new age of thermal hunting in every era of survival history. Humanity has feared predators with teeth, claws, or rifles. But today, the most relentless hunter has none of those. It is silent. It is tireless. And it sees heat like ink on white paper. As night settles over a frozen pine forest, imagine a lone survivor slipping between the trees. His boots crunch lightly over snowpack formed during a cold snap in January 2024. Overhead, a faint buzzing echoes through the canopy. It's not a bird, it's a thermal drone, equipped with a next-generation WWII sensor capable of detecting temperature differences as small as 0.05 degrees Celsius, the same technology found in the Flyer Boson Plus systems widely used by search and rescue teams and military units alike. This new threat has rewritten every rule of hiding. You can camouflage your clothes, you can bury your shelter under branches, you can melt into the shadows of a cave. But if your body radiates even a fraction of a degree more heat than the environment, the machine sees you. It sees everything. Since around 2018 to 2024, thermal drones have become exponentially more precise. Their flight times doubled, their algorithms improved, and their detection ranges expanded. Data from NATO training reports reveals that modern UAVs can identify a human thermal signature from 300 to 500 meters, even through light vegetation or thin shelter walls. That means hiding is no longer just physical, it is scientific. This is where the concept of a ghost shelter is born, not a bunker, not a hideout, but a thermal illusion, an engineered refuge designed to vanish not from human eyes, but from sensors, processors, and pattern recognition algorithms. It is a shelter that teaches one simple truth. You do not escape technology by running faster. You escape it by disappearing smarter. And if you understand how heat behaves, how the environment absorbs it, and how the machine interprets it, then you hold a tactical advantage that few modern preppers even consider. This is the beginning of that journey. Deep breath. And step into the world where surviving means learning to deceive the most advanced eyes on Earth. 2. The science behind thermal vision. Why humans always glow. Thermal cameras do not care about color, shape, or camouflage. They care only about contrast, the difference between your temperature and the world around you. This is why a human being almost always becomes the brightest object in a thermal frame. The average person emits roughly 80 to 100 watts of heat, according to NASA metabolic data. That is the thermal output of a small light bulb, constantly radiating into the world even when you're standing still. Your skin rests around 33 to 34 degrees Celsius, your breath around 32 degrees, and even your footprints stay warmer than the ground for up to 40 to 90 seconds, depending on moisture and soil composition. Thermal sensors exploit these differences with ruthless efficiency. Modern systems operate on multiple infrared bands, especially LOIR, 814 micrometers, which is optimal for detecting warm bodies against cold environments. Cameras used by fire departments, border patrols, and increasingly civilian drones convert the infrared radiation you emit into pixel-by-pixel temperature maps. The result is frighteningly clear. A person hiding behind a thin tent. Visible. Someone crouching under a pine tree. Visible. A figure in a dark basement. Still visible. This is because infrared penetrates gaps, openings, and thin fabric. Even concrete, when cracked or poorly insulated, leaks enough heat for sensors to register anomalies. The battlefield and survival lessons of the last decade reinforce this truth. During the conflict in Ukraine, thermal drones were often able to identify soldiers hidden in abandoned barns simply from the faint warmth leaking through gaps in the walls. In US wilderness search operations, missing hikers have been located in minutes because drones picked up the heat of their bodies long before rescuers reached the area. All of this proves that a person is not merely seen by thermal sensors. They are announced like a flare in the night. But there is a deeper layer here. Just as machines detect warmth, the environment absorbs, reflects, and redistributes it. Rocks heat and cool at different rates. Trees trap warm air pockets. Valleys collect cold air like invisible rivers. To vanish, you must stop fighting the natural flow of heat and instead learn to ride it, bend it, and blend into it. This sets the stage for the most critical step of all. 3. Terrain is half the battle. The choices of hunters and guerrilla ghosts long before drones existed. Hunters, trackers, and guerrilla fighters learned that survival starts not with gear, but with terrain. The land has always shaped visibility, movement, and concealment, and today it shapes thermal invisibility as well. In 2021, NOAA published atmospheric data showing the existence of cold pockets, microzones where dense air sinks and lowers ground temperature by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius compared to surrounding areas. These pockets appear in depressions, ravines, and shaded valleys, especially during early morning and late evening. They are natural thermal shields. If you build a shelter inside one, your heat signature blends into ambient cold air rather than rising into open space. Dense conifer forests offer another advantage. Their multi-layered canopies trap air, slow heat exchange, and create thermal turbulence. The temperature under a spruce canopy can be 2 to 6 degrees lower than neighboring clearings, especially in winter. This turbulence disrupts the clean thermal silhouette that drones rely on. Mountainsides and rocky outcrops also play a hidden role. Dark volcanic rock, basalt or obsidian, absorbs large amounts of heat during the day and releases it slowly through the night, creating thermal noise zones. These zones confuse contrast-based algorithms because the rocks mimic human-like emission patterns. Guerrilla fighters in Afghanistan learned this instinctively, often positioning themselves near cliffs that radiated enough heat to blur their signatures on NATO surveillance cameras. Water, too, is a powerful ally. Shelters built along riverbanks, wetlands, or saturated soil benefit from natural cooling. Water absorbs heat far more effectively than air. A body positioned near a flowing stream experiences rapid heat dispersion, reducing contrast and making detection significantly harder. And then there are the timeless lessons. From the resistance fighters of World War II, who hid inside earth-burned farm cellars, to the Sami reindeer herders of Scandinavia who sheltered in frost hollows during blizzards, the most effective forms of concealment have always come from reading the land and letting nature do the heavy lifting. When you choose your terrain wisely, you eliminate half the problem before you even start building. A ghost shelter does not force the environment to cooperate, it harmonizes with what is already there. Because in the world of thermal detection, the ground itself can become your greatest shield, or your greatest liability. 4. The three-layer defense: insulation, reflection, and thermal mimicry. If terrain is the first half of disappearing, then the structure you build is the second. And it begins with a principle older than electricity itself. Stop heat from escaping, slow it down, and disguise whatever remains. In survival engineering, this becomes what I call the three-layer defense. The first layer is insulation, but not the kind used in modern homes. Nature provides far better tools. Compressed moss, straw bundles, packed leaves, and even clay-dusted soil create dense, irregular thermal barriers. Archaeologists studying Viking turf houses in Iceland found that layered turf could reduce heat leakage by nearly 60%, a surprisingly effective method that allowed these homes to retain warmth during brutal winters, while masking heat signatures from a distance. You're borrowing that same logic, containing your warmth, slowing its escape, and forcing it to move through unpredictable organic material. The second layer is reflection, and here we borrow from space technology. NASA's tests on mylar blankets show that they reflect up to 97% of radiant heat when positioned correctly. But the key word is correctly. If the reflective layer faces inward, it bounces your heat back at you. If it faces outward, it can reflect warmth into the environment in a targeted way. However, if it's too smooth, too clean, or too flat, drones will detect the cold void it creates. That's why mylar must always be backed by irregular natural textures: pressed leaves, clumps of soil, bark shingles. So sensors interpret it not as a man-made object, but as part of the forest floor. The third and most important layer is thermal mimicry, the part most people ignore. Disappearing isn't only about lowering heat. It's about blending your remaining heat into the environment's thermal rhythm. Consider stones. During the day, many rocks absorb solar heat and release it slowly over the night. Moss-covered surfaces hold moisture, creating cooling effects that last for hours. Fallen logs in boreal forests trap pockets of warm air. By covering the exterior of your shelter with a blend of these natural elements, wet soil, aging bark, stone fragments, You mimic their heat signature so convincingly that a drone's contrast-based algorithm reads your shelter as one more piece of the landscape. By combining these three layers, insulation, reflection, and mimicry, you create what survival scientists call a thermal buffer zone, a region where heat moves so slowly, so organically, and so unpredictably that it no longer forms a recognizable human heat pattern. Instead, to the machine, it becomes noise. To the forest, it becomes just another shadow. And to you, it becomes life. 5. The invisible vent, the hidden lifeline of every ghost shelter. A mistake many preppers make is believing they can trap heat entirely. But no matter how well you insulate, the human body produces continuous warmth and humidity. Without a controlled vent system, that warmth eventually leaks out in concentrated bursts, creating thermal plumes easily detected from above, towering columns of warmth that flare like beacons. To avoid this, you need an invisible vent, a system designed not to eliminate warm air, but to disperse it so gently and so quietly that the environment swallows it whole. The concept isn't new. Engineers studying traditional Russian masonry stoves observed that their labyrinth-like channels forced warm air through narrow corridors before releasing it slowly, reducing visible plume by up to 70 to 80%. This principle can be adapted for survival by building a shallow trench system, no deeper than your forearm and just wide enough to crawl an airflow path. Cover it with wet soil, rotting debris, or layers of branches. As warm air travels through this damp, uneven material, it gradually loses temperature. By the time it escapes to the surface, the difference between your vented air and the outside world might be less than 1 degree Celsius. This is almost impossible for drones to detect. Even better, combine this with a dual vent strategy. Place a small intake vent low to the ground on the shelter's cool side, preferably facing shade or a cold pocket. Then position the outtake vent along the trench system, guiding warm air beneath layers of moisture. Rich material such as damp leaves or riverbank soil, moisture absorbs and redistributes heat far more efficiently than air, creating what scientists refer to as a thermal bleed, a slow and diffuse release rather than a vertical plume. Real-world testing supports this. In 2019, the Canadian Survival School conducted thermal concealment trials in boreal forests. Shelters equipped with underground diffusion vents reduced thermal detectability by nearly 90% when scanned from 60 to 80 meters above the canopy. Without the vent system, the same shelters were detected instantly. This proves one thing: your invisible vent is not optional. It is the backbone of your ghost shelter. It transforms danger into diffusion, urgency into invisibility, and your presence into nothing more than a whisper of warm air dissolving into the earth. 6. The art of low and slow heat, mastering your invisible footprint even with perfect insulation and flawless venting. Your behavior inside the shelter can betray you. The human body is a radiant engine, constantly generating heat, and everything you do either intensifies or diffuses that signature. To survive, you must adopt the low and slow principle, a discipline practiced unconsciously by the world's most experienced hunters, trackers, and soldiers. The principle is simple: produce less heat, release it more slowly, and avoid sudden spikes that drones are trained to detect. For example, boiling water at 100 degrees Celsius produces a plume that rises rapidly, exceeding surrounding air temperature by 10 to 40 degrees. Even small cooking fires generate thermal anomalies visible from hundreds of meters. This is why elite survival instructors recommend using thermal sinks, stones or large water containers that absorb heat from your cooking gear, letting it dissipate gradually over time. History offers remarkable examples. During World War II, Allied pilots who crashed behind enemy lines often relied on catalytic heaters, small devices that burned fuel without flame and released heat slowly through chemical reaction. Their thermal signatures were nearly undetectable by early infrared scanners. The same principle applies today. By transferring heat into dense materials like rocks, clay pots, or water-filled buckets, you allow warmth to disperse over hours rather than minutes. This is the heart of the low and slow method. Cook only with heat sinks. Warm yourself with indirect radiant sources. Eat meals that require minimal heating during the night when the environment is naturally warmer. And move deliberately. Fast movement increases metabolic heat, raising your signature by a detectable margin. When you control how much heat you release and how quickly you release it, you begin to shape the thermal landscape around you. You stop being a flare. You stop being a beacon. Instead, you become a faint suggestion, one that blends into the slow heartbeat of the forest, the stone, and the soil. This transformation is subtle. It isn't dramatic, but it's powerful enough to confuse even the most advanced sensors scanning the world from above. 7. Thermal camouflage. When hiding means matching the Earth's heat, thermal camouflage is not about color. It is about rhythm. Every surface in nature warms and cools at its own pace. Moss-covered bark releases its heat differently from wet stones. Soil rich with organic matter cools faster than sandy ground. Pine needles breathe out warmth long after sunset. These subtle variations create a living mosaic of temperatures that drones must interpret every second. To disappear within that mosaic, you must mimic this natural thermal behavior. Research from the Australian Defence Science and Technology Group in 2020 revealed that thermal camouflage blankets, layered with irregular textures, reduced apparent heat signatures by 6 to 12 degrees Celsius, enough to fool mid-range sensors entirely. The key was not uniform insulation, but irregularity, mimicking the chaotic patterns found in nature. You can replicate this effect with simple materials: wet soil, decomposing bark, green moss, and stone chips, all applied in overlapping, uneven layers around your shelter, create microzones of cooling and heating that disrupt thermal contrast. A drone scanning from 120 meters above sees not a warm structure, but a patch of earth undergoing its normal daily temperature shifts. Yet you can take the deception further. By placing naturally warm or cool objects around the perimeter, sun-warmed rocks, logs that retain heat, or wet sacks of soil, you generate what survival engineers call a thermal noise field. Instead of one clear hotspot, the drone sees dozens of competing signals. Algorithms struggle to identify which, if any, belong to a human. This technique has been used by reconnaissance teams since the late Cold War, when soldiers hid in mixed-temperature debris fields to avoid experimental IR scans. Thermal camouflage works best when predictable patterns disappear. Straight lines, smooth surfaces, and flat plains must be avoided. Nature is never perfect, and for the machine to believe you belong to the forest, you must stop being perfect too. 8. Urban camouflage. Disappearing in broken cities of steel and stone, the wilderness offers natural shields. But in urban ruins, the rules change. Concrete retains heat for hours. Steel beams radiate warmth long after sunset. Empty apartment blocks create wind tunnels that twist and scatter thermal signatures. Paradoxically, these harsh environments can be some of the best places to vanish if you understand how they breathe. Basements, crawl spaces, sewage tunnels, and abandoned utility shafts all provide dense material barriers that either absorb or diffuse heat. Concrete walls more than 20 centimeters thick drastically reduce infrared leakage, especially if humidity is high. After major wildfires in California, search teams reported difficulty detecting survivors in structurally intact basements because heat dissipated unevenly through rubble and moisture-soaked foundations. To build a ghost shelter here, start by using existing infrastructure. Old duct systems and ventilation pipes become perfect channels for dispersing warm air. Just like your underground vents in the forest, but already engineered to move air without detection. Block off direct openings, force warm air through debris-filled passages, and let the building itself hide you. Next, leverage the thermal drift, effect created by open high-rise corridors and shattered windows. As wind moves through an empty tower, it creates unpredictable temperature patterns, sometimes shifting by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius within seconds. Standing or sheltering near these zones confuses thermal algorithms that depend on stable background readings. In war zones like Aleppo and Mariupol, civilians survived drone sweeps by staying close to large concrete slabs or collapsed bridge sections. These structures absorbed heat during the day and cooled slowly through the night, masking human warmth almost entirely. Urban survival isn't about hiding inside the building. It is about hiding inside the building's thermal inertia, its slow pulse of heat. Where the city breathes, you disappear. 9. Testing and tuning. The military approach to perfection. No ghost shelter is perfect the first time you build it. Even elite forces know this. That's why every professional concealment strategy includes a phase most civilians skip: thermal reconnaissance of your own shelter. Affordable handheld thermal cameras, some costing less than a mid-range phone, allow you to see exactly what a drone sees. But the trick is not simply pointing the camera once and calling it a day. A shelter's signature changes dramatically based on the time of day, the moisture in the air, and the temperature of the ground. For this reason, military survival instructors conduct thermal inspections at 4 specific intervals: just before sunrise, at midday, in the late afternoon, and after nightfall. These windows represent the most extreme variations in environmental heat, especially in forests or rocky terrain. Before sunrise, the ground is coldest, making warm leaks glaringly obvious. At midday, sunlight floods the landscape with heat noise, revealing whether your camouflage can blend into chaos. Late afternoon reflects cooling transitions, one of the hardest moments to conceal. Nightfall tests whether your insulation and vents truly prevent your shelter from glowing like an ember. Record everything, make adjustments, change vent angles, add more debris, shift your camouflage materials, bury one layer deeper. This iterative approach reflects the same methodology used by NATO observation teams when building hidden forward posts during the 1990s Balkans conflict. They would revise their concealment setups sometimes 3, 4, or even 5 times in a single day until their positions appeared indistinguishable from the environment. Mastery comes not from guessing, but from measuring. This is how amateurs become ghosts. 10. Conclusion: when hiding is no longer hiding, but vanishing in the age of thermal drones, hiding is no longer about shadows or silence. It's about understanding how heat moves through the world, how it rises, how it diffuses, how it clings to stone and flows through soil. A ghost shelter is not simply a structure. It is a conversation with the environment, a delicate bargain you make with the laws of physics and the sensors that enforce them. By choosing terrain shaped by cold pockets, turbulent canopies, and water-rich soil, by building with the 3-layer defense that slows, reflects, and mimics thermal rhythms, by mastering the invisible vent that dissolves warm air back into the earth, by practicing the low and slow discipline that prevents detectable spikes, and by creating thermal camouflage that imitates nature's imperfect patchwork, you transform from a heat signature into a natural fluctuation, a harmless echo of the landscape. The machine stops recognizing you. The drone stops following you. The world stops highlighting you as an anomaly. You are no longer hiding. You have vanished. This is the secret of the ghost shelter, a fusion of science, history, and survival instinct. A skill not for escaping technology, but for outsmarting it. And for those who understand these principles, the forest, the stone, the riverbank, and even the broken city become more than shelter. They become armor. If this knowledge empowers you, share it. Subscribe to Historia Prime for deeper explorations into forgotten engineering, lost survival wisdom, and the ancient logic that still outperforms modern technology. Because in this world, the future doesn't belong to the strongest, but to those who know how to disappear.